Okay, we are streaming live on Facebook. Okay, good evening, Facebook world. We are coming at you with our second virtual voting conversation, and our topic this month is voting access. So, to kick us off, let's have a few words from Brianna Lennon.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and thank you especially to our I don't want to say panelists because it is a conversation, so discussants, I guess, for joining us on this really important conversation about access and dismantling obstacles to voting. We wanted to put out a space to be able to have these conversations for making sure that these important concerns are brought to light, especially ones that our office can help improve, and just to kind of to hold this conversation so that people can have an opportunity to voice concerns and issues and questions, answer some things that after the 2020 election we heard a lot of, and just kind of talk about all things voting. And I really appreciate Adonica for moderating it tonight too.
All right, wonderful. Okay, well, I'm going to do a very quick introduction so you know who you're hearing from. So we have with us tonight David Mitchell, who is the co-director of the Middleton Center. We have Brittany Hughes, who is the regional organizer for Missouri Faith Voices. We have Roy Lovelady, who is the creator, correct, of the People's Defense. Is that right? Okay. And we have Nikki McGruder, who is, well, everybody, she's Nikki McGruder. So yeah, we know Nikki's work. All right. I want to jump right in and just give everybody, if you would like to take just an opportunity to just say a little bit about the work that you do now. I think that, everybody would like to hear about what it is that you're doing in these areas and how you came to be an expert on these subjects. I'm gonna have to call on somebody.
Well, okay, I'll go since I'll step into the fray. No one ever wants to lead off. In any event, good evening. I'm glad sort of folks turned out for this about voting access. The work that I do is actually I work on issues related to ex-offenders, the formerly incarcerated, and those who are returning and re-entering society, and looking at the impact that laws have on disenfranchising those individuals. But more importantly, looking at not just the individuals who are disenfranchised, but when you expand it further, looking at communities that are collectively disenfranchised because of other policies, right? Because of mass incarceration, because of policies that disproportionately impact communities of color, looking at a lack of or an undermining or lessening of political power. I'm not really sure I would call myself an expert, quite honestly. I think that's a phrase that's often bandied about and people sort of use it incorrectly. I don't think there's really an expert in the area. But my perspective or my take on voting access in this regard is often there are a number of folks who are eligible to vote, but who do have a prior criminal record who feel as though they may not be eligible. And I don't think poll workers or individuals are fully aware of the rules surrounding their eligibility. And often those individuals are denied and therefore aren't given an opportunity to cast a ballot. And so that's sort of how I entered the topic.
I can go next. Good to be with you all in this space and the folks tuning in virtually. My name is Brittany Hughes. I'm the community organizer here in Columbia for a statewide org called Missouri Faith Voices. We do community organizing work that is centered in racial dignity and economic justice. And a lot of the ways that plays out for us is through political engagement and voter education. If you live here in Boone County, you've probably got a phone call from some of our leaders and volunteers, or got a door knock from some of our leaders and volunteers around some of the issues that have been on the ballot the last couple years, i.e. Medicaid expansion, raising the minimum wage, things like that. So I'm really glad to be in this space and to talk a little bit more about the work that we have been doing and how that intersects with making sure folks have equitable access to the ballot box.
Thank you, Brittany.
Hi, hello everyone, Nikki McGruder. I am currently the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for MU Healthcare. But I've become familiar with a lot of community members through the work with the Inclusive Impact Institute because we were in the community a lot doing different programming. I too am not going to call myself an expert on these topics. Specifically, I do work in DEI, and there's a lot of intersections with all of the topics that we discuss. And so when we're talking about voter access, I just remember having conversations with Brianna about some, concerns around framing and how we get in front of populations that are disenfranchised and the minoritized populations, and how do we establish trust and how do we help to get people to the polls. And so we've had all of these really fruitful, important conversations. And now it's just like, how do we move these things to action? So I come from more of a concerned citizen point of view, and just making sure that I was almost about to answer a question, just making sure that we get in front of people, give them the information that they need, and provide them the resources that they're needed so their voices can be heard. So yeah.
Thank you, Roy.
Okay. Hey, everybody. My name is Roy Lovelady, and I am the baby of the bunch. I am the president and founder of People's Defense. The organization was founded when George Floyd was killed, and we took to the streets and started marching. But once we took to the streets, we knew that that wasn't going to be the limit of what we were going to do. And with the president election that was going on in that moment, we were trying to round people up to make sure that we could see a change. And the only way to do that was to gather voters. Well, in the Black and Brown community is one of the #1 places in which I sought to get voters out to the polls. So I hosted different events about voting, and within hosting those events, I reached out to Brianna Lennon, who then gave me information, voter registration, etc. And I'm not an expert, but I've done my homework to make sure that when somebody is posing a question to me, sorry about the background, I'm at City Council as well. But when questions are posed to me, I want to make sure that I'm passing out the right information. So Brianna Lennon she went leaps and bounds with it, making sure she got me information to pass out to the groups as I hosted park events or events inside of my salons. And she made sure that I got information so that I could lead the Black and Brown community who are registering to vote in the right direction. And I thank all of you for being here.
Thank you, Roy.
You're more than welcome.
Brianna, you want to introduce yourself? You should. I was at the Juneteenth event on Saturday, and I love the way you came up and got that mic and started talking to people about voting, even though it wasn't on the program. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Brianna Ashcraft. I work in the county clerk's office. I am the absentee coordinator for the county. So anytime that I have that chance and opportunity to tell people about voting, bringing their awareness, I try to do that automatically because it's not always out there. So if I can do it, each one teach one,
Yeah, I love it. That was very exciting.
Well, thank you. I'm glad people heard me and that they remembered that today we having this event here. So for those who were not at the park, we have this live and you'll be able to catch this live again.
That's right. That's right. And share it with them at the park as well. That be watching and be watching next month as well.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to jump in with the first question. So question 1 is, election officers spend a lot of time putting out accurate information, but viral social media and national stories get more attention, and it can lead to people believing that their absentee ballot won't count or that they won't be able to vote at their polling place. What kind of role has disinformation played in making it more difficult to vote?
I can take that question since I am the absentee coordinator for the county. So basically, what have came across is that they're saying that absentee ballots will not count. I do not know where that information came from, but I'm here to clear it up. That is not true. Actually, absentee ballots are actually one of the first ballots that is counted on the processing days when that time frame does open. So your absentee ballot does count. Now, the purpose of you completing an absentee ballot is because for some reason defined under the law and statutes, you're not able to make it to the polls on election day. So whether that's you're going to be out of town, maybe you're going to be incapacitated, as in, you know that you're going to be in the hospital, or you're just physically disabled that prevents you from going to the polls, we try to get people to absentee vote so they can take care of that ahead of time. So maybe that's where they're saying that you won't be able to vote at the polls because you're only allowed to vote once. So if you vote absentee, yeah, you're not going to be able to vote at your polls because you've already taken care of your ballot before election day.
I think part of it is also, and that's one is the
And I'm sorry,
of,
my computer.
oh, we good? So I think one of the things is or a couple of things. So one is the lack of the lack of clarity on the terminology, right? So absentee, mail-in, election day. I think people will get confused as to what these things mean and which process might apply to them. Right. And I think it's very easy that you get people in the popular press or who are wannabe, bloggers and wannabe journalists who don't do any research, who come out and distort what may be coming out of the election offices. Right. So Brianna, her office might be very clear as to what these things are. And then people get them and they conflate them and they misconstrue them and people sort of don't understand them. Right. I think that's one of the things. I think the second thing is that there are so many sort of there are these the anomalous cases of people who may commit voter fraud. There's so few of them, but they get hyped up, right? So you get the one case of somebody who does this. Oh my God, this person wasn't eligible and they voted and they're going to trial, right? And they're getting a case against them. And people go, oh, well, wait a minute, I don't want to make that mistake. And so people are like, well, I can't do this without actually knowing what the sort of the rules and the procedures are, right? And so I think a lot of people are afraid in not wanting to make a mistake that's going to result in some kind of punishment, right?
Right.
I think a lot of it is also interrogating why disinformation exists and who it serves, right? And a lot of that is to cause confusion. There are particular groups of people in our country who have a tremendous amount of voter power, that's untapped voter power. And there's a group of folks in the country that has a vested interest in making sure those folks don't use the power that they have. And so I think one, we need to interrogate like where that disinformation is coming from and why it exists. And then secondly, like a lot of things, it's a narrative battle. So for where we see things that aren't accurate, our experts, if you will, naming things in the public that don't actually exist around how we vote and what the barriers and obstacles are, how are we pushing those things out? And how are we making sure that there is a strategy to combat the things that we hear that aren't accurate? It's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay.
And for those who have questions, anytime you have any questions about the process of voting or access to voting, you can always call us in the office. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions by phone. We also do walk-ins if you need more information, or if you're just not the type to get up or get out, or you can't do that because you work and we're only on 8 to 5 hours. We do have social media page. We have our county clerk's office official website page, Facebook page, that we put a lot of information on. And if you were to write that page, you will get a response back. So you don't always have to physically be present to ask a question. If it's quicker, just to email, whatever, we're here.
And I think it's nice for people to know, for you to put that out there, that you are there to answer questions.
Yeah.
Because I have to say that this is honestly probably the first community that I've lived in where I have felt that sort of outreach from the county clerk's office to the community, where they say, hey, call us with questions. Hey, stop in if you have a question to ask, and let's see what we can do to help you, or to make sure that the misinformation is cleared up, because there's definitely a lot of it out there. I mean, if you listen to the news, sometimes it'll have you thinking that if you show up to vote, you know, with your license and your social security card and that little card that they send you, that you're still not going to be able to vote. So it is good to get the facts, you know.
Yeah, right.
Nice to get the facts. All
That's why
right.
I think it's so important. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say it, Danica. That's why I think it's so important for like even the work that Roy's doing out in the community, like going to the people to answer the questions and figuring out exactly what the concerns are, because that's going to be the population that's probably not going to be too inclined to call or search the website to find the answers. They're just going to believe the information that's put out there by these major media outlets or whoever is coming with an agenda to keep people away from the polls or instill this fear or distrust so that they don't even make the effort. So I just want to say, like, to what Roy's doing with going out into the community, making sure that he's getting the information and then relaying it. You know, a lot of us need to be doing just that and breaking things down, because the disinformation, we're already trying to encourage people to exercise their voice, right, and their right to vote. But then you have the additional responsibility and burden, if you will, of peeling back all the layers of all that disinformation that they've received. So yeah, just kudos to the work that you're doing, Roy. And I'm sorry, can I just shout out Missouri Faith Voices too? Because I've went through those emails right before going through the polls and been like, wait a minute, okay, what did they say about, to get myself together. So, you know, those types of initiatives are so important.
Absolutely. And I agree with that 100%, because generally I find myself, you know, a couple days before the election, like, let me search my emails, because I know somebody has sent me some information that I can read through and know what ballots are on the, you know, what's coming up on the ballot. A lot of times we talked about this in the past. Yes, the sample ballots save my husband every year. I just pull it out and I'm like, look, this is what you're going to do. But, you know, that type of information is so important. You know, for people who want to be conscious about what's happening and who's on the ballot and what this, you know, what this wording means. We talked a little bit about that last time, how sometimes things are put on the ballot and they're confusing. You know, the verbiage is confusing. So it's nice to have an organization that will help kind of break that down and put it in layman's terms for the people who don't know. So thank you all for those efforts, for sure. Okay, so our next question is, what are some of the voting obstacles you've heard about or actually experienced?
I know I've talked to Brianna about this a couple of times, but more often than not, the biggest issue that I have usually at my polling place is with identification. I usually don't use my ID when I validate myself as a voter. I use my voter ID card. And the reason that I do that is because there are folks who don't have access to IDs, who still participate in the democratic process, or folks who just don't want to have all of their sensitive information shared with a stranger in that way, right? But in the sharing of that ID, they also ask you to verify your place of address, wherever you live. And I don't know if a lot of folks know this, but you actually don't have to audibly confirm that. I know one thing that's happened in the past with DV survivors being concerned about folks knowing where they live because it restricts the safety that they feel in the event that someone knows their abuser. And so if you don't feel comfortable sharing your information audibly, you don't have to do that. I don't think it's something that folks are always aware of when they're volunteering at the polls. And so there's been a few times where folks have kind of challenged me on that and have wanted me to say something audibly. That's one thing that's happened for me before. And then another thing, which I think pretty much anyone that does voter work really, really tries to push, is that if you're in line before the polls close, you don't have to get out of the line at 7. If you're in line, you're good to go. You don't have to go home. If anyone tells you anything other than that, that person ain't telling you the truth. And so those are two things in specific that I can think of in terms of experiences that I have or I've heard others share.
Well, one major obstacle that I ran into and several others in the community is knowing your polling place and if you have changed your address or you have moved. So I moved in the middle of an election year and I went to my original place. And then they told me, well, I gave my current address. And so they told me that I couldn't vote here. And then I went to the new place where they said I should vote at. And then they told me I had to go back there. And so eventually I just ended up going downtown to the city building and voting there. But that's a huge obstacle when people fail to change their address. They send you, it turns into this game of going from here to there, from here to there. So I always encourage people before time to make sure that they get their address updated, because that becomes a huge obstacle at the poll.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you listen to the press around the time of elections, you would only think that you could only bring one particular form of ID to the polls, and it's got to have a photo on it, right? I mean, if you listen when it comes up for election time, that becomes the big news. Like, oh my God, this is the only thing that's required, and it's not. And I think that's one of the biggest sort of misunderstandings, right? You could use your utility bill, right? I mean, you can use things that have your address on it to indicate who you are. And I think people also don't recognize the fact that if you don't have that stuff, you can do a provisional ballot, right? That there's another mechanism to vote. And I think people get caught up in or at least it's the misunderstanding is either not understood as explicitly by those who are at the polls, and certainly by those who are coming in, right? And so then if someone challenges you at the poll, right, Brittany's like, look, I know the law, so you can't sort of dissuade me. But if you're unsure, uncertain, someone at the poll worker's like, no, you can't vote, then you might be like, well, I don't know, is that true or not? And is there anyone there to sort of reference that, right? To have that conversation, to be like, no, this is what the rules are, right? And so that I think is a huge sort of disability right there.
Okay.
I'll caveat this with we are not a nonpartisan org, but I think a huge obstacle that we have to name is our legislature. Just thinking about Missouri, we have the 3rd highest number of proposed voter restriction bills, and there are 43 other states who have that kind of legislation. So out of 43 folks, we number 3. And so I think, which is kind of a double-edged sword because we're talking about access to voting, right? But what are the decisions that we're making at the ballot box that inform how we will or won't be able to have access to the ballot box? Whether that be elected officials who are wanting to be in office who don't share that priority for folks to have access to voting, or whether that's current folks in office who essentially work for us, who aren't doing the people's business and doing the will of the people. And so I think that's something we also have to keep in our mind when we're talking about obstacles. Yes, there are things that are happening just nationally in the community, just based off what folks do and don't have access to, but there are also people that we're choosing to keep in office who are making it that much harder for people to have that access.
Okay. So I do, before we name off like so many obstacles, because it's one thing to name off the obstacles that you're going through, but let's provide some answers to dismantle those obstacles. So Brittany, one of the obstacles I heard you mention was that domestic violence survivors are scared to either register to vote or confirm their address because they fear that their address is going to get out there. Is that right?
Not exactly. I was saying when folks go to their polling place, not feeling comfortable sharing their address audibly because of who may or may not be listening.
Got you.
Yep.
Okay. Well, what I do want to bring up, just in case there are somebody out there listening, there is a court program that voters can sign up for. It's called a Safe at Home voter, where your voting record would be confidential, marked as confidential. So it'll be a certain way that you'll be handled at the polls, so you don't have to worry. That's for domestic violence survivors, and that's a whole court program. So if you wanted to know a little bit more about that, you can also check the Secretary of State's website. So there are options for people who are in fear of registering to vote because it is a public record. You can request to have that closed off and confidential. So that's one thing that a lot of people don't know, but that is an option that's out there for you. I believe Mr. Mitchell spoke on the provisional ballots in regards to presenting the ID or not ID, and he is correct. There is a no ID provisional ballot that we will assist you with. If you don't want to show your ID, we will move you over to the provisional ballot, and that's just handled a different way. It's still your ballot. You just have to be a registered voter, and we'll confirm that in office, and also check signatures for that too. So there's a way to do a no ID provisional ballot, and we can still match it to your correct voter record. So there's no scare or fraud of anything like that. I mean, we are on that in the office. And then Roy, you said something about change the address. I have also heard that that's a big one too. Unfortunately, that's just, although you're registered to vote, and what I do want the people to know is, yes, you have to register to vote, but there's also voting laws in your state. See, when a lot of people don't understand the laws or don't know the laws, they feel like their rights, their voting rights are being imposed upon. And that's not exactly true. You just have to know how voting laws work in your state. So as far as if there's anybody out there who goes to a poll and then they realize that their address is not up to date, and you don't want to play, back and forth, or you don't know where your new polling place is, you do have to have your voting record correct at the time you are voting. That's what you are signing to. But say if you're on one side of town, your address get changed, and now you got to go to a completely different side of town, we do have central voting locations, meaning that any precinct can go to that particular central voting place. And usually the central voting place is in our government center building located downtown on the corner of 9th and Ash. So if you don't know where to go, or you just don't want to go to the one you're assigned to, find the central polling place and you'll be able to vote with that. So I'm sorry if I got off topic, but I just wanted to make sure I provided an answer for the myths that I'm hearing, because that's what we're here for tonight. What else? The address. And your address, I mean, you can really update your address in various places. You can update it online. Now, some people choose to go to Google, and Google might carry you off yonder. So you can change it on the Secretary of State's website. You can request to have a change on our official Boone County website. You can request to put in this change at the DMV. You can come and see us in person. And if you need to send us an email, we can help you. We can do something by fax. There's different ways, and well, I would say there's more ways than one to make sure your address is up to date. Now, I will highly, highly recommend that everybody checks that their address is up to date before the election day. And one myth that or an obstacle that many people face on election day is that some people believe that you can go vote at the same polling location every time. That is not true. In Boone County, polling places are subject to change every election. Now, it doesn't mean that we're trying to trick you or we don't want you to know where to go, but truthfully, not every election we can get the same places. We have to request to have those places. You know, some of the places can tell us no. Some of the places can say not this time. So we have to systematically, you know, re-precinct people, and not re-precinct, excuse me. We have to change the polling locations because we can't always get them all. So you cannot always expect to vote at the same location every election. Bigger elections cause for more polling places because of the expected turnout rate. If it's a smaller local election, you can mostly expect that it may change. And that is found on your sample ballot every time. So that's also why it's most important to keep your address up to date, because if you don't get your sample ballot, you're gonna easily probably say, well, I don't know who's on the ballot. Your sample ballot is gonna tell you, it's gonna tell you where to go to vote, and you have that time to do so. And sample ballots generally comes out about 3 weeks prior to every election date. So, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to blab on, but I just want to get that out. Or what I do want to get out there is that I believe that maybe you, Brittany, said that maybe some offices don't put that information out there as much. That could be very true. That could be very possible. But as a U.S. citizen who wants to vote, you have to take the initiative yourself to look for the information that you may not see as common. And that's why I tell people that don't be afraid to call us, because we're going to give you whatever information we have, and we're going to listen to you and see what do you need help on, or what can we help the next person on. So you can't always expect for that information to just to jump out and grab you. We have to learn this for ourselves and do that research on our own. So I just want to say that too. We can't blame nobody else for not having that information, because trust me, that information is there. You got to want it bad enough.
I'm gonna lose you. Okay. So I like this next question, and I'm interested to see how you guys answer. Is it a bigger challenge for people to register to vote, or to encourage registered voters to participate in the election? You know, everybody come out when it's the presidential election.
I think so. One, I think it's far easier to get folks registered to vote for the following reasons. I think we have done a good job at mobilization on voter registration, being in spaces and places where people are, right? Consistently asking, are you a registered voter in X county? Are you a registered voter here? Have you moved? Taking some of the things that Brianna just said about some of the challenges, and asking people, well, are you registered? Have you moved? Right? And being very clear. I think it's far more difficult to get folks to participate, one, in non-presidential years, but I think recently folks have begun to see the power of those who we elect in those off years and those offices that we have, right? I mean, quite honestly, if you ask most folks, is it really important on which judge you elect, on who's on city council, on who is going to be representing you locally? most folks will be like, yeah, why should I vote in those elections, right? But I think recently we've begun to see the power of those people, how much local power actually really means. And so I think now it's getting better, but it's still the issue of, and this goes to some of the later questions about some of the things that get in the way, right? Taking the day off, getting out there, taking time off, actually making the process, making that effort, that still gets in the way of that. And because of the inconsistency of when those elections are offered, right? Because the presidential one is always going to be where it is, right? Because the other ones can change no matter what, right? They can pop up, and you've got to really be paying attention as to when it's coming if you're not going to be around, if you're not going to be present, right? That takes a lot of self-effort. And I think those are the ones it's far harder, in my opinion.
I agree with you, Mr. Mitchell.
I know it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I think they're equally difficult. I think you have a lot of people who don't believe in the process and believe in the system as it's constructed, who don't want to participate, so they're not going to register because it doesn't feel like the process is working for me right. And then I think you have people who are already registered, who are discouraged by the way that things have went in the past. Folks who might not know the ins and outs of the importance of our local elections, like David mentioned, and how the decisions that are made in the general election years are actually those are the folks who enact the policy that affects us the most day to day because they have our local context. And so I think they're equally difficult. I am encouraged though in how the landscape is changing. I think the last year with COVID and also the uprisings that we saw across the country are kind of waking people up to the power that they have and how that power can be used. I think the more elected officials that we have, not just here in Missouri, but across the country who actually have an interest in doing the people's business is going to help folks actually want to be empowered to register and also turn out if they're currently registered.
Okay. Well, we are going to jump into our next question, which is, what can be done to better educate voters about the voting process so they can better navigate how elections work?
I'd say break it down. Like I referenced the emails that put things in layman's terms. Mr. Mitchell and Brittany have already talked about helping people connect. Like, how can you connect how important local elections are? And I think this last presidential election got people, and that whole process got people to really start to think more critically about how important local elections are. But you have to help people understand how getting the right people working for you in your community impacts the national representation. And so I think breaking it down, because I don't know how many times I've had to go and try to figure out, now, who is this judge? Like, and what is their record? Now, what is this? What are we, trying to implement? What is this bill for? So if you have someone or an organization that is willing to do some of that work and get rid of that tricky language that's in there and really explain it to you, it would help people better engage with the process. Because right now it can seem really overwhelming, regardless of if there are organizations out there with the information and that anyone can access. Sometimes it is about going to the people to help them understand how to make all of the connections. And so sometimes we have to go back to basics. Think about when you were first we teach about the branches of government in elementary school and start that conversation there. Sometimes you might need to go back to basics like that to help people understand how it all fits. But I just think what can be done to better navigate, help people better navigate it, is break it down. Because we do the work, or those that do the work, and we see it and hear it all the time, that's one thing. But for those that only really think about elections during every 4 years, for example, and haven't really thought about how We're discussing things like roll carts and how that impacts them, or the new bag system. I'm not going to down it. I know the city had to do whatever they had to do, but like even things like that, right? You have a voice, but it's helping people understand and break it down. It's not, insulting anyone's intelligence. Friends, we all need a little extra help every now and then if this isn't what we're looking at and engaging with every day. I'm the first one looking for a cheat sheet or a resource, or to hear from someone that I respect on what their positions are and why they're going a certain way. I'm the first to admit, I do that as well. But break it down.
I feel like I have so many answers to this question. But one thing that I'll say is that spaces like this are really important, especially in non-voting years. Kind of what is the primer that we can give to folks so that they are ready when it is voting season. I think that we have opportunities to also do that with the youth. So what are mock elections that get people comfortable with what that process looks like at a really early age? So when you are 18 and it's time for you to vote, you don't have hesitancies or questions because you've been going through this process forever, right? I remember being in middle school and elementary school and participating in mock elections, and everyone in the classroom being excited because we got the voting sticker, and kind of learning about a ballot and understanding those things that really kind of informed the way that I think about voting as an adult. And then another thing that I'll say is we have to be really, really diligent about community resourcing. And so who are the folks that are doing this kind of work year round? And how is it that we get those people into spaces to actually talk about what it looks like to be a participant in an election, or can talk about the ins and outs of an election outside of our clerk's office? You guys do a good job, and it is your job to do it, but there are folks in the community that can be helping to amplify and lift that work because they do it in the space already. I know we as Faith Voices always try to put out voter report cards around key issues, namely it's been school board elections that we do a lot of that work in, talking to folks across the state around, hey, if you go to the polls and have issues, here are some things that you can do. Making sure folks have cards with the numbers for the hotline in the event that you do have issues at the polls. And so I know that Come Up for Progress does some really solid work around elections too. And so we have a couple groups here in town that are doing that work. And I think the more that we're in coalition with one another, and the more opportunities we have because people in the community are naming where we need to be, the more successful our work could look.
Hey, I would like to agree with what both of you ladies said. First about going back to basics, and second about creating alliances and a strong coalition. Most definitely, one thing that I can say is that when I went to school, they only taught about the president and how important it is to vote for the president. And so we missed one of those, being able to understand and know what a local election is. And I personally did not know a lot about local elections. And I'm speaking for my own self, who is a very educated person. And so one thing that we do as People's Defense is hand out cards like Know Your Right cards. I think that would be great to also have like Know Your Rights about voting. That's something simple. And then maybe going door to door to create those. And maybe, so I own a salon and I'm also a cosmetology instructor. So when I combine those two things, I think that we need to teach, but also meet them where they are. So if I can go door to door to get those people to come to a central location where I can get somebody like Brianna or Brittany, who has a wealth of information, to have a conversation with them, that's why it would be important to create those coalitions. But I think all the different pieces are needed. Like me going door to door, and then the space for everybody to come get their education once their peak has been interested. Because in the also letting them know that there is trust in, there is a sense of trust in government, and somebody has to take the first step. It's not always going to be them. Sometimes it has to be you. So getting the information and knowing that your vote does count, and it counts on a plethora of levels. So don't neglect your right to vote.
I agree.
Yeah, I think what you guys are, definitely everything you're saying is 100% on. And spaces like these and social media, our first question was about how social media and mainstream media can influence in a negative way, but we can also use it in a positive way, for spaces like this and for sharing articles and information. And when you see, a conversation like this happening, share it on your page. Like, try to get more people interested. That is another way I think that we can use social media, for good, in order to spread some of the things that are truth and some of the things that need to be spread. I think back to how David answered the first question, or when he introduced himself, talking about how some people who have been incarcerated just don't think they can vote. And that's it. And that's it. I can't vote because I've been in jail, or I did this or I did that. But do you really know if that's the truth? A lot of times the answer is no. And so when we read articles about these kinds of things, when we read articles that dispel myths, those are some of the things that we should be sharing in these social media places to get that word out. It's nice to spread the latest viral video, but let's spread some things to get some information out for sure.
Right.
So I just want to add on this, and is that, so I learned something already tonight from Brianna about the Safe at Home program. I had no idea that existed, right? And I consider myself to be a knowledgeable voter. I had no idea, right? And so I think there are things that that quite honestly are these pieces, these tidbits that folks just don't know, right? And it's about, I think, inundating people, right? I think about, I teach all the time, right? The first time you say something in a class, folks might get it. The second time you say something in class, more folks are going to get it. The third time you say it in the class, they're gonna be like, damn, you said this 3 times. Right, because I want you to get it, right? You basically have to say some things over and over and over again. And who said the piece about the ballot initiatives? That language is confusing for anybody. I don't care who you are reading that, like, what am I voting for or against in the ballot stuff, right? And it is about sort of breaking it down, Nikki. It is about having spaces and places where people are like, who they trust in the front of the room to be like, look, this is what this is about. And it's having it as often as possible in as many spaces as possible, right? It's just one of those things where you have to go to people and you have to get it out there. If it's printing it, if it's social media, but it's about just sort of repetition constantly, all over and over again, and sort of giving, I think, sort of young people examples. I went to go first vote with my grandmother and my mother, taking me to the polls, right? That's how I learned about voting and its importance.
Yeah, and I always get excited when I see people at the polls with their children.
Yes.
I always know that that's a lesson being taught, right? It's not just, I didn't have a babysitter or they had to come with me. I always look at that as a lesson being taught.
I have a question too. So when this is over, and I noticed that there's so much information in this video alone, how do we share this video? How do we put it on our Facebook pages? Where do we go to now to share it? Because I missed that part of the conversation. And I want to make sure that
it is running live right now.
Go ahead.
Yes. So if you go to the Boone Clerk's office Facebook page, that's where it is live. And you can share it from there. Like, you can share it right now. It'll be up on the page, as you can go back and replay it. So it can still be shared, even once it's over. And I believe you guys probably leave them up, I would think, because this is something that could, it becomes a resource. It becomes a resource. And so because I know Roy's at that city council meeting, let me get this last question in. If you could change any part of the elections process to make it easier for eligible voters to vote, what would that be? What change would you make to make it easier for eligible voters to vote?
This might be semi-answering the question. It feels like it's on track. But it's actually funny that we're having this conversation because we actually have a huge opportunity nationally to pass legislation that's going to mean things for people. If you follow the news, you've probably heard of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act or the For the People Act that are going through the Senate right now. And what these legislations are going to do is make it easier for folks who are currently voting to vote, make it easier for folks who don't have access to voting, vote. And it's also going to clear up some of the muckiness around where money plays into our elections and how those decisions are getting made. I know a lot of people are probably familiar with the No on 3 campaign and the Yes on 3 campaign that happened. And when we're talking about redistricting within the state of Missouri, this legislation would make that redistricting happen across the country in such a way where we aren't splitting voting blocks into segments, right? Right now, especially in Missouri, a lot of the ways that our redistricting works is that when we draw new lines, it actually cuts the powers that voting blocks have because of how those lines are drawn. And so that feels like a really big opportunity for us to be able to reach out to the folks that represent us in the House and the Senate and let them know what our priorities are. People are going to make decisions on our behalf unless we tell them that we want otherwise, right? And so I think being able to get folks comfortable around making those contacts with elected officials and really help connecting the dots for folks around how these things don't just impact what happens every 4 years, but like everybody is named here, how those things impact what happens every 2 years or every year, depending on kind of what the elections in your area look like. Even down to the people that are in charge of doing those things in our state. The Secretary of State's office is an elected position. If there are things happening in those offices that make it hard for folks like our county clerks, or if you live in another context where maybe you have an election board, then there are things that we need to do through voting and through community engagement to make sure that we get folks in those offices who serve our interests. Elected officials work for us, y'all. These folks are on a constant job interview, which means they have a performance evaluation. And if we don't like what's going on, we have the right to terminate and institute someone else who can do our business. And so I think just being able to make sure that folks know about those things that are happening in terms of those ledge efforts, and then being able to, like Nikki said, break it down for folks for why it's important and why you need to have a vested interest in what's going on. And then whether it's kind of having a vessel to move people into or coming up with a collective strategy, which is something that I always lean to. Impacted people are the experts because you know the things that you are affected by and you know the solutions that are needed in order to get you out of those circumstances. And so I think it all just goes back to what are our opportunities to organize effectively? How many people can we get to move into whatever that strategy is, and then we gotta get ready to do the thing and be able to move powerfully together.
I love all of that.
Can I add something before we end it? Earlier, just a few ago, somebody brought up felons being able to vote. And I just want to reiterate, and I say it time and time again, but you never know who's listening and who may catch it this time. Like Mr. Mitchell said, felons can register to vote as long as they have been discharged from probation and parole. So just because you're a felon, I don't want you to think that you're X'd out forever. You just have to be discharged from probation and parole. And we have given that information, updated information, because it was quite outdated until we got it updated. But we work with the probation and parole office here in Columbia. So at least here in Boone County, in Columbia, your probation and parole officer is going to have that information to give to you. We also work with the the smaller outreach, like the Reality House, and I believe there's I can't think of it off the top of my head. I want to call it the Rock, or I believe.
Yeah, the Reentry Opportunity Center, the Rock.
Yeah. We have reached out and provided accurate and up-to-date information so that those felons know that you can re-register to vote. You'll get a discharge paper. I believe it comes from the courthouse, maybe the state. But it also tells you, so you have to look at that that paperwork that's given to you, because it tells you in there somewhere that you can re-register to vote. Also, what I get a lot is like, why does voting matters? Why do my vote don't count, or blah blah blah? I don't understand where that one comes from, and I think that's just the go-to answer that people tend to use because maybe they don't know, or maybe they don't like it. And I want to tell people that no matter what said out there on the internet negatively about voting, your vote matters somewhere. Don't ever think it doesn't. Just because the person may not have won, that was still your vote for somebody. So don't think that it doesn't matter. Or sometimes, I don't know if people get the impression, or it's like they want a thank you card for voting. Maybe that's why they feel like their vote don't matter, because they don't get individually recognized for that vote. But when you get up and you vote and you move it in numbers, it will show. You have to grab one, have them grab another, and keep that going, because you move in numbers. And that's what matters also in voting. You have to get up and you have to tell the next person about it, and you cannot expect this individual reward, because you're going to reward yourself. That's how I look at it. And so that's the information that I try to get out there and tell people. And also, I see a lot of people, when things don't go right in the town or something has happened, I see people get on social media and they want to get upset about these choices that was made between at the courthouse or whatever, or they want to talk about justice reform. You have that, you can do that. You know, you don't have to wait on these big presidential elections, because you have to remember they use, like Brittany said, these are elected positions, like the senator, the governor, like those are big people. You know, you would want to get out in the smaller elections. You want to think about the judges, the prosecutors, all of your district reps, your councilmen, women, or your school board, or the local amendments. Like those are what's going to affect you faster, if anything, because that's what's going on in your town locally, or that's what's controlling your state, you know.
All right.
So I try to get that information out there for people.
If I could make it easier, the one thing that I would make easier is education. Just pushing that education repetitively to all members, so that exactly like what we're doing now, making sure that year-round, monthly, weekly, as much as possible, get that information out so that people, the myths are easily dismantled, because the information is so readily available, whether they heard it by ear or read it in a book or went to a class. Getting that education out is one of the most important things to me, because somebody somewhere, sorry guys, somebody somewhere still needs that education, whether it be door to door, whether it be in a group, whether it be just handing out a pamphlet in hopes that they read it. Getting that information out and maybe simplifying the information, just as if I could simplify anything else, I would simplify the language on the ballot. But everybody knows that that's done by design to confuse, so that things are swayed. But education and simplifying the language would be my thing that I would want made easier.
The one thing I would add to Brianna's statement was that for misdemeanors, you're not ineligible unless you are incarcerated, right? So there's a whole framing. If you think there's felonies and misdemeanors, right? And then there's suffered. So, but if I were going to change anything, quite honestly, the one thing I would change is same-day voter registration. If I were going to change things to make it easier, because you've changed addresses or what have you, right? The mere fact, and we all know this, the mere fact why we don't have these easy mechanisms is because from when voting was accepted, its creation, it was never intended to be universal. It was never intended to actually have everybody participate in the process. Same-day voter registration would be the easiest process to get people up to speed, to have them vote right then and there, and nobody's vote will be discounted.
Absolutely. And my thing, of course, would be breaking down that tricky language once again, ensuring transportation is not an issue, making sure that we encourage employers to provide time off or whatever is needed for people to get to the polls. And just really quickly, I think about, I'm looking at this panel of melanated people, or discussants, if I think is what Brianna called it earlier. So we're discussing this important topic, you know, of people with people of color. And the thing that drives me regularly, and I probably post about it, is my ancestors went through too much for me not to do what I have been given this opportunity to do. I was today years old when I learned about the Ocoee, Florida massacre. And I don't know how, but for whatever reason, learned about it. You know, November of last year was the 100-year anniversary. So when I'm reading things like that and looking at what my ancestors had to go through to exercise a right that so many of us just blow off, one, maybe because we don't understand it, or we have bought into what the society has said about our votes not counting. I have a responsibility to do this, right? And so whatever we can do to get the information out, utilize Faith Voices scorecards because they are golden, and just seek out the information that is available, because if we can break down the language to help people understand and then connect our local elections to the national game and help people understand that, I think that would just be helpful for sure.
Well, I am encouraged by this discussion, this conversation. I hope that everybody continues to share this conversation on social media, this one as well as the one from last month. And do not forget that we will be back with a third voter conversation on July 12th. And that topic will be how to. So that will be our next month's voter discussion. The conversation will be around how to of voting. So thank you, David. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Nikki. And thank you, Roy. We appreciate all your input and all the information. And we hope to see some of you back with us for our next voter conversation on July 12th. Have a good evening.